Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a Wireless Newsroom, bringing you a world news roundup, the day's events at home and abroad, reported as plainly and carefully as the record allows. Today's headlines. In Ukraine, Russian strikes have driven widespread winter powder outages in the southeast, disrupting heat, water, and transport as temperatures fall. The last remaining U.S.-Russia nuclear arms treaty, New START, is days from expiration without a clear successor in sight. In Washington, the United States is moving to withdraw from 66 international organizations, a major shift in U.S. participation in multilateral bodies. In Venezuela, U.S. seizures of Venezuela-linked oil tankers and new policies on oil sales are drawing a sharp reaction from Caracas and attention from Moscow and Beijing. In Gaza, the ceasefire holds in name, but violence and disputes over aid access continue, with the United Nations warning of humanitarian consequences. And in Paris, farmers drove tractors into the capital to protest the EU-Mercosur trade deal. Now the news in full. From Kiev, the industrial southeast of the country, Ukrainian officials say Russian attacks have again struck energy infrastructure, leaving large portions of the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporozhye regions without electricity, an acute problem in the depth of winter. Authorities report that repairs are underway, but the disruption is broad. In Dnipropetrovsk, officials have cited hundreds of thousands of customers without power, with additional knock-on effects for heating and water services in multiple areas. The reports describe cascading impacts familiar to anyone who has lived through a hard blackout. Transport slowed, emergency systems strained, and basic services running on backup power where it is available. Ukrainian officials say some mines lost power, prompting evacuations of workers. Russia has repeatedly said it targets infrastructure connected to Ukraine's war effort. Ukraine and many of its partners say the pattern amounts to deliberate pressure on civilians by degrading electricity, heat, and water during freezing weather. There's also the cold itself. Ukrainian officials have warned that falling temperatures can turn an outage into a health emergency, especially for the elderly. For families with small children and for communities already worn down by months of attacks and repair, these could be detrimental. Now to nuclear arms control, an issue that moves slowly until it doesn't. Reuters reports that New START, the last remaining nuclear arms treaty between the United States and Russia, is set to expire on February 5, 2026. The U.S. State Department's description of the treaty notes it was extended to remain in force through early February 2026, and that it includes inspection and verification provisions that historically have helped both sides understand the other's forces. What happens next is uncertain, and uncertainty cuts in two directions. One, without a treaty framework, the world's two largest nuclear powers could lose a set of formal limits and transparency measures that, however imperfect, have served as guardrails for decades. Two, negotiating any new treaty, especially one that might eventually involve other nuclear states, would be complex and time-consuming even under calm circumstances. These are by far not calm circumstances, everyone. Reuters reports that Russia's President Vladimir Putin has suggested a one-year extension of staying within existing New START limits, while the U.S.'s position is not described as having settled on a response. Arms Control Association, writing on the issue, has emphasized the stakes. New START sets caps on deployed strategic warheads and launchers, and expiration without replacement could mean fewer constraints and less predictability. Next, to Washington. The Associated Press and Reuters report that Trump's administration has signed actions to withdraw U.S. support from 66 international organizations, including a number of UN-related bodies. The administration's stated rationale, echoed in White House materials and Reuters reporting, is that many of these bodies promote policies the administration describes as conflicting with U.S. sovereignty, economic priorities, or domestic policy aims, including on climate and governance. Critics, quoted across AP reporting, argue the move reduces U.S. influence in forms where global rules and standards are shaped and could cede space to other powers. This is an important distinction, ladies and gentlemen. Withdrawal is not merely a symbolic gesture. It can change funding flows, staffing, technical cooperation, and voting power, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. And it can reshape how allies and competitors play around American participation. Now, to one of the most dramatic developments in the hemisphere. Reuters and the Associated Press report that the United States has seized Venezuela-linked oil tankers and is moving to control aspects of Venezuelan oil sales, with proceeds to be handled through U.S.-approved channels under the administration's plan. Reuters reporting describes the seizure of tankers, including one that at points sailed under a Russian flag, raising tensions with Moscow, which condemned the U.S. action. AP reports U.S. officials described the approach as a way to exert leverage over oil distribution without a broader military intervention, including easing select sanctions while directing sales through approved routes and accounts. There are also sharply contrasted claims about recent violence. A Reuters report quotes Venezuela's interior minister saying 100 people died in the U.S. operation that removed President Nicolas Maduro from power, an assertion not presented as independently verified in that same reporting. Reuters has also reported on related legal proceedings and disputes over immunity claims and critical charges in the United States, a subject that may set precedents for how U.S. courts treat foreign heads of state and former leaders in future cases. Now to the Middle East. Reuters reports that despite a ceasefire agreed earlier, violence has continued in Gaza, including deadly incidents in and around Khan Yunis, with local health authorities reporting fatalities and the Israeli military at times offering different characterizations of targets and threats. A separate urgent struggle continues over humanitarian access. The Wall Street Journal reports a conflict over regulations and access for aid groups, with Israeli officials arguing the measures are needed to prevent militant infiltration and protect security, while aid organizations warn the rules can endanger staff and impede operations. The United Nations has also weighed in. Related reports, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has expressed deep concern about Israel's suspension of certain non-governmental organizations, warning of consequences for humanitarian operations. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reports ongoing danger along with what it describes as a de facto dividing line inside Gaza, with civilians facing risk in areas of Israeli military activity and restrictions. Now to Paris, where politics came on four wheels and steel treads. The Associated Press and Reuters report that French farmers drove tractors into the capital to protest the EU's proposed trade agreement with the South American Mercosur bloc. Farmers' unions argue the deal could expose them to imports produced over different standards and at lower costs, threatening livelihoods, particularly in sectors such as beef and poultry. Government officials in France have expressed opposition to the agreement and have been under pressure from farmers' groups to block or reshape it. Back to the United States, AP and Reuters report President Trump has said he wants to block large institutional investors from buying single-family homes, arguing it would help younger families and first-time buyers by easing competition in the housing market. Reuters notes it is not yet clear what steps would be taken immediately and what would require legislation to fully implement. Supporters of such moves say institutional buying can tighten supply and raise rents in certain markets. Critics argue restrictions could have unintended effects, including on rental supply, investment, and home building, and that affordability is driven by multiple forces: interest rates, zoning, construction costs, and the pace of new housing. And finally, for tonight, a story at the crossroads of law, technology, and personal safety. Reuters reports that under the new UK online safety rules, technology firms must take steps to block unsolicited sexual images following the earlier criminalization of cyberfashing in England and Wales. In related reporting, Reuters says Britain's data watchdog has contacted Elon Musk's X and XAI about compliance and safeguards amid concerns over explicit AI-generated images associated with X's chatbot features. Europe is watching closely. Reuters has also reported actions and calls for legal steps from officials in France and Germany concerning the spread of non-consensual imagery and the platform's responsibilities. Before we close, a quick note for business and consumers. Reuters reports that the U.S. Supreme Court is expected to issue rulings soon, with close attention on a case involving the legal basis for tariffs imposed under emergency powers, an outcome that could affect tariff collections and potential refunds. The Wall Street Journal reports U.S. Customs and Border Protection is moving toward an all-electronic refund system as imports watch for what the court decides and what that might mean for claims and processing. That is the news as we have it, reported with care and contributed to the best available record. This has been the Wireless Newsroom, World News Roundup, Thursday, January 8th, 2026.